Good afternoon, everybody. My biggest challenge is to talk only for 40 minutes, and I have a group of friends up here who are going to help me do that. But I know, and I count on the fact that if I go over, Janice will just come up and take the mic out of my hand because she knows me well. I want to start off by saying that for the last 2 days, and I'm kind of glad we're doing this now, the second day, or kind of as we're gearing down the end of this wonderful conference, and I love that it's an annual event. I feel like I've been in the real world with listening and talking with all of you about the real important reality work that happens with children and families, because that's really the real world. And so I want to remind you, as we start talking about what's going on federally and nationally, that I recognize that we have now just left the real world, and we're taking an immediate sharp detour to Washington, D.C. And so kind of hold on to your seats a little bit. Some of you may follow a lot of what happens in D.C. Some of you may have decided a long time ago that it's just too frustrating and too difficult to really feel like you have an impact on. One of my goals in life is to encourage every single person what kind of an impact you can have, but I agree on any given day it doesn't really feel like you do. But let's detour on down that road on another freeway and go visit Washington, D.C. and really talk about kind of the 50,000-foot view of what's happening. And I think there's some really good things happening that encourage our incredible work in inclusion. And I'm with everyone who said in the last 2 days that I really look forward to the moment when we don't use that word inclusion anymore, because it will mean that it's not a necessary word, that we'll just have development education. No need to say inclusive. But we're not quite there yet, we know. But with all of your good work, we'll get there. A reminder, and we have lots of reminders about why it's so right what you spend your lives doing day after day. And one of them was just 60 years ago this year, is Chief Justice Warren announcing with the Supreme Court decision. And so this is so telling for our work, isn't it? It says, a unanimous decision declaring segregation was unconstitutional. But look at that quote. We conclude in the field of public education, the doctrine of separate but equal has no place. Separate educational facilities are inherently unequal. And that's kind of what I think we want to keep in mind as we look at all of our work toward full inclusion. Full inclusion really requires us to get to a place we have universal preschool. And of course, it's so exciting right now, everything that's happening with universal preschool, frustrating about getting legislation passed, getting all the money that's needed to do it, but lots of encouraging pieces. The president just a week or so ago at Northwestern talked about a new goal, a national goal, that really is about 3 times what we do now, but to make sure that we'll enroll 6 million children in preschool settings in the next a couple of years. And so it's a goal for us all to remember. So while we feel lofty, and I think we'll go back and forth over the next 40 minutes of things that will make us frustrated or discouraged, but in the end, I think we just keep our eye on that prize, which you work at every day. So here's what we're going to spend our time on. Briefly talk about this Congress that is leaving. It's technically not gone. They're home working on election, and they will come back just for a brief couple of days. Talk a little bit about the election. You'll be pleased to know. I know everyone goes into these conversations with your own political, philosophical, ethical beliefs and views. I will do my utmost best to be nonpartisan, and that's my job. I have to be. So when you're hearing things, and I say things like, so the government didn't do that, you may say to yourself, well, thank goodness they do too much. Or you may say, darn, why didn't they do that? We all look at these things differently, but we'll talk about what happened and what is happening and what didn't happen, and then you will make your own decisions, of course. But we'll talk about the reality of the fact that it matters who wins in the election, because that's who makes decisions about what laws get passed, or even, frankly, what laws get talked about. And we'll talk about that with the Child Care Development Block Grant. We'll talk about early learning from an administrative perspective, Race to the Top and the new exciting preschool grant. And then we'll talk about it in the Congress, because there's legislation that's pending. Won't happen this Congress, but we'll work hard on it next Congress. And a little bit about what else this Congress has done, because they're getting ready to adjourn and leave, and then we'll have the next Congress. So we'll do that. First, though, let's get ourselves in the mind frame. How many of you are House of Cards watchers? Okay. How many of you are Veep watchers? Okay, a few of you. How about Homeland? More, okay? Some of you probably, you know you're in trouble if you like every one of these, right? How about Scandal? Who likes Scandal? That always gets a lot of hands. And now finally, last but not least, who watches Madam Secretary? The new one. Okay, so clearly you're all in the right conversation because you kind of like this stuff. This is not real. That's not the reality, although on some days you feel like some of these things are the reality, right? They seem to mirror. But let's look at what they actually do and have done. This particular Congress, think back to your civics, every Congress has 2 years, first session, second session. This particular Congress is getting ready to leave. They're in the end of their second session. They left to go on recess after they took what's called the summer recess. I'm going to try not to sound too cynical and sarcastic, but you know when you get all excited because we have 4-day weekends because Monday's a holiday? Those are weeks in congressional talk. Now, I will try to be fair. They're considered district work periods. So when we have a big 4th of July party on Friday or Monday, they're out for the week. Memorial Day, they're out for the week. In August, they do their big August recess. It's about 6 weeks. You thought August was 30 days or 31 days. They're gone usually from the first day in August till after Labor Day. In an election year, like we have this year, they come in for about a week, maybe 2, and then they adjourn to go home and campaign. Now, I hope you know that that means they're in Washington fewer days, because usually they are only in session Tuesday through Thursday, because they go home on weekends. But that also means they're back home where you are more often, which also gives you a good idea about advocacy. And those are considered district work times, and they're there doing town hall meetings and online chats and visiting programs and meeting with you when you call or when you yell at them. But those are important times for us as well. They have very little time, but when they come back, and they will, whenever they come back after an election, it's called a lame duck session, as you might guess, because let's pretend half of this room either resigned or did not get reelected. You come back anyway as we finish up this Congress, because we're all part of it. What happens in that lame duck Congress will very much depend on what happens on Election Day. And you can imagine why, right? Because it's a really tight election. Basically, the last, 5, 10 Congresses have had a reputation as the do-nothing Congress, right? Each one competes with the one prior, and they always do beat their personal best, and the next Congress always passes fewer bills. This one in particular is passed the least. And again, you could be saying, well, thank goodness. Or you might be saying, that's why nothing got done. But they did. Reality is they didn't get things through. You know why, right? You see them on the news, and you hear them talk to each other. The famous debates that have been shown on all the clips in the last 2 weeks, where they're arguing over anything but the big issues that you and I would probably want them to be talking about. When they got to April last spring, and remember they're off a lot of the summer, they had only signed only 86 bills had been signed into law. You can't read this graphic here, but you can see, and I will tell you that the x-axis are the Congresses, and the very last one, where's my laser? Over here, 113th, that's where this Congress is. These are the number of bills introduced and passed. So you can see there are dips, and then we had a big year, 106th Congress, then they started slopes, and here we are, okay? So that tells you. So if you've been waiting for something to get through, and we have a lot of legislation in our broad human services, education, health field, where things have been waiting for reauthorization quite a while. Each Congress comes and goes, and the bills all expire. You know, you get to the end of a Congress, you could have a bill that's so close, like child care block grant is right now. If it doesn't finish before they go, it expires and they have to start over. So we poll. Now, these polls all sound the same, but just in case you remember, think of where you fall in here. This one was from the spring, but they're usually all about the same. Do you approve of the way the Congress is doing their job? So look at the percentages. So there's a few people that are happy, and then there's somewhat disapprove, 29%, and strongly disapprove, 48%. Kind of makes you wonder who these 4% don't know, no opinion people are. They've just given up, I guess. But basically, we're not real happy with the Congress, and they know that. And a lot of them, when they resign or when they say, I'm not running again, you often hear them say the reason, it's because I'm not real happy either. I wake up in the morning and I don't feel like I am contributing and creating value and doing the things I believed in, which is why I went there in the first place. We do have some champions in disability and early childhood that we're losing at the end of this session of the Congress. One of them you know well because he's George Miller, so a friend and a colleague in your state. Congressman Miller's been there for a long time. These pictures show them when they first joined the Congress and now. And the other is Tom Miller. So George Miller's been in the House, and he either chairs or he's ranking member of the House Education and Labor Committee. And Senator Tom Harkin from Iowa, who either is usually the chair or the ranking chair of the Senate Help Committee, Health, Education, Labor, Pensions. Those two committees, by the way, authorize almost all of the legislation that's important to the families we work with and the communities that we're in. So these are really important slots, but both of them are retiring and people are sending them great well wishes. They've been there a very long time, but they feel like it's time for them to go. And so, of course, we celebrate them. The new Congress, this is why it matters. And of course, this is why my personal soapbox, this is why it matters when you vote. The new Congress comes in January 2014, early in the month. Whichever party has the majority in the House and in the Senate is in control of a lot of things. Number one, they chair the committees. Number two, they have the majority of numbers of members on a committee. So now think right there. Anybody, if we're all in the Congress, we can introduce a bill. We can introduce 10 bills a day. They get a number, they get filed. They die that way unless they get considered. The only way to get them considered is they get assigned to a committee, and a committee chair agrees to have them considered and marked up by that committee. Otherwise, they're merely a press release. And sometimes that's the purpose they serve, but they're just a press release. In order to get something considered in a committee and have the likelihood of it passing through a committee, you really need, from your perspective, whatever that is, the majority of that committee. Even if it gets through committee, because every once in a while, they behave in a bipartisan way, unfortunately not much anymore, but sometimes they do. In order for it to even get to the floor, you really need, well, you need the agreement of the leader of the House or the Senate, and they can stop it. So it's really important. It matters who chairs the committees, and it matters the role and the value. They also create the rules. They have rules committees, and they change those rules whenever they want. And that matters too then, who's in charge. So it really does matter when it feels like it doesn't, particularly in a year like this where particularly the Senate is so close. So let's look at what things they impact on. We said we'd talk about budget and budget and funding tends to be kind of a grim conversation for us, with the exception of the preschool money that we're going to talk about in a little bit. So let's just briefly talk about it. This pie, which you probably can't read the shapes, but you've got the slide, and I'm going to talk you through the colors because I think it really does matter. What you have on this side of the pie, actually going all the way over to here, the lime is Social Security, 23% of the budget. This is the entire budget, everything that we spend, okay, no matter what. And this kind of gives you a flavor of where our programs fit in this slice of the pie. Lime is Social Security, 23%. Medicare and Medicaid, 25%. That's the red. Now you've really got half the pie gone, right? Net interest on the debt, the yellow slice, that's 6%. Can't do a thing about that, have to pay it. You know, every once in a while they talk about the debt ceiling, got to pay the 6%. And then over here you have other things that are called mandatory. What mandatory funding means, and its important concept, is they don't vote every year. When you get alerts from all of your groups that say, call your congressman and tell them to vote for an increase in Head Start, increase in child care, increase in IDEA. That's not these programs. These are all mandatory. They're set in statute. No matter what, they get their money. So what are we calling for? We're calling because there is defense. Okay, now defense gets voted on every year. Think of what's going on right now all over the world. Defense is 18%. You kind of almost might as well put that with this pot, right? It's a tough time to be thinking about defense. What we have over here, this one tiny slice, at Thanksgiving, you'd probably be lucky to get that piece. 17%, it's called non-defense discretionary. We, IDEA, Head Start, child care, mental health, energy, transportation, roads, FAA, everything else that mostly impacts people's lives every day are in this slice of the pie. It's 17% of the budget. Basically what that means is, you know, and everybody has their opinion on, do we cut, do we increase revenue, do we cut things? Okay, everybody's got their opinion. Everybody knows what those buzzwords mean. If I say, do we increase revenue, what am I really saying? Taxes, and is anybody running for Congress right now, House or Senate, and saying we really need to increase taxes? Might as well stay home, right? Never. So revenue is always a third rail. Cuts, people talk about cuts. So what would happen if we cut that 17%? You could literally slice that 17% with a big scissor, take it right out of the budget, cancel every domestic program that we know about, and you wouldn't even touch the deficit, let alone the debt. Okay? So while nobody's talking about this because it's too scary and too political, basically it's hard to get there from here. So that's the context in which you hear people talk about there is money, there isn't any money. We have no money. So when you advocate for human services programs, education, disability, health, Head Start, childcare, what do they say? Gosh, I'd love to, but we just don't have any money. Okay? We've got money, it's just spoken for. So that gives us our perspective. Now, a year ago, I just want to walk through a little scenario of 3 years of funding just to see what impacts on you. Right now, the year you're in, the money you're spending is from last fiscal year, and it's called 2013, and we had a big, everybody remember the word sequestration? You probably didn't hear it at all until then, right? Sequestration was the result of a huge budget deal that was reached in 2011 when the Congress basically said, how sad is this? They basically said, we can't do it. We cannot make a decision on that pie. We've tried. We've all offered up slices and slimmers and spoonfuls, but we cannot come to agreement on that pie. So here's what we'll do. All we can come to an agreement on is a process. And it's a process that admittedly by everybody is so egregious and such a ridiculous way to make fiscal decisions that nobody would ever do it. So we'll feel safe. We'll put in this thing. We'll give ourselves really strict caps. And then we'll do it, they said in 2011. But same people will do it. And if we don't do it, we've got this backdoor safeguard, and it's a big scissor called sequestration. And if we don't come to agreement, okay, that's it. You just cut. And then everybody said, we're done. We passed it. That was 2011. And it will never happen because nobody would ever agree. Half the cuts in sequestration come from domestic, and half the cuts come from defense. So the defense advocates were thinking there's no way this will ever happen. And the domestic folks were thinking there's no way this will ever happen because nobody will ever agree to cut defense. That was August of 2011. They gave themselves a whole 14 months to do it. New Year's Eve, December 2012. They said midnight, literally, I don't know if you were watching this New Year's Eve that night, but a lot of us were. 20 minutes after midnight, they said, we can't do it. We can't do it. But we can't sequester. So instead of sequester, what will we do? We'll give ourselves 3 more months. So they said in December, New Year's Eve, 2012, we'll give ourselves to March 2013. And then we'll do it. And if we don't do it by then, we'll then take the big scissor. What happened in March? They took out the scissor. Sequester happened. These are cuts. Special ed. I'm thinking of some of the programs most important to us around the table. But it was universal cuts. So you had cuts in special ed, you had cuts in preschool special ed, cuts in Part C, cuts in Part D. We had cuts in Head Start, cuts in childcare, slots were cut. I don't need to tell you because you lived it. And then the next year comes. So now, this sequester thing, by the way, is a 10-year deal. It's not a one-time only. It was not a one and done. So then they said, okay, we did sequester. Everybody was just floored. They couldn't believe it. So we got to last fall, a year ago now, and they were getting ready to pass the money for the following year, consider sequesters. And they got in, they dug their heels even deeper, and they said, not only aren't going to take out the sequester scissor, we're going to shut the government down. So a year ago, right now, you probably remember, they literally shut the government down for 16 days, yelling, screaming, pointing fingers, my fault, your fault, she did it, I didn't do it, it was his fault. And the country was just like, you're kidding, right? They had a recess after about 12 of those days, and they went home, and all we can figure is everybody must have said, you go back there, you march right back in there, and you do your job. We don't really much care what you do, but do it. Because they came back and the government opened. Now, was everybody happy with what they did? No, but it was like, geez, just go do your job. So they did. So they reached an agreement. This is how far apart they were and continue to be. They were over $80 billion, not with a B, not million. They were $80 billion apart between the House and the Senate. That's why they shut the government down. So what would we logically do as people if you and I had $80 billion difference and we had to come to an agreement? What's the logical thing to do? Split the difference, right? Now, do I want to split the difference? Heck no. Do you want to split the difference? Heck no. Do we have to compromise? Looks like we do, right? So they said, we're not shutting the government down any more. So they split the difference. Go figure. It took them all that time. Halfway between the Senate and the House, they restored some of the sequester. But here's the big deal. They figured, while we're making a deal and while we're being agreeable, let's do a budget for 2 years, because we can't do this every year. This is too hard. So they did a budget for 2 years. They canceled the sequester for 2 years, but keep your eye out there, because for the next 7 years, we got to consider it again. And it's either going to show up as cuts from the sequester or just cuts from the budget caps. So it's not looking good going forward, but at least at that point, they came to an agreement. They did some really good, agreeable work, and everybody was thrilled. Because not only that, not only a no sequester, but look at the votes. Really still very political, okay? It was not easy. This is why elections matter, you know, because the votes are tight. They did a 2.6% increase, and they actually put some of the money back in sequester. Head Start money went back, not all of it. Child care money went back, not all of it. Part C money, not all of it. A lot of programs got some sequester back. But remember, now we've jumped in this big hole from sequester. So when you get money back, it's still not bringing you back above. It's just filling in the hole a little. Unfortunately, programs like preschool special ed got nothing back. So they are just going down further. Now we're in the new year, okay? So you had this horrible sequester. You got a little money restored, which you may or may not have seen. You know, the numbers look big when they're at the national level. Think of what happens to those numbers when they start being disaggregated by state, and then when they go down to local programs, and then when they go to local family services. So it's hard to think of these big numbers, because in the end, they don't give you as much as even though California gets a good share, California has a lot of people. So for this year, now we're working on a budget. And you'll be pleased to know that when they went home to campaign for the election, they knew that the American people wouldn't tolerate a government shutdown. So they passed what they call a continuing resolution on the budget. And they said, you know what, we can't decide now. Are you shocked? We can't decide. It's too hard. We'll go home, we'll have the election, and we'll come back after the election, and the lame duck will decide, not us. So while they're working, the president has given his budget request. President recommended some increases in some of our programs. You can see them, and you've got the slides. This is the exciting one for us, the $250 million preschool development grant and $57 million for child care development block grant. So increases, but remember, the president sends a budget in, and it may or may not happen, usually doesn't. The famous line is, president's budget is dead on arrival, doesn't matter which party the president's from. But this particular administration, so keep this in mind for funding, including that preschool expansion grant, is you can do things two ways. You can pass legislation and then fund it with that small 16% of the pie. Or if you're an administration and you have your priorities, and they all do, and this particular administration, the Obama administration, has a priority in early childhood. And we know that they've made that very clear. And this administration, like previous, tries to leverage whatever money they can for their priorities. And this administration believes in competitive bids, frankly, more than formula. So it doesn't mean that the administration is against any of our formula programs. It just means that, like any administration, they want to leave their mark, and they want to do competitive grants to incentivize people to do things that they want to do. That's what Race to the Top School Age was all about, and that's what Race to the Top Early Learning was about. 20 states now have Race to the Top. California, of course, was in the first tier. 5 got it first. Then we had 5 more, first year 9 states, then 5 more, then 6 more. There will be no more Race to the Top awards. I mean, there'll be continuation money, but because they don't have the funds to do that, because there's no legislation. But this is the money you're all excited about. We've been talking about it now for 2 days. There's $250 million, went out for competitive bid. Everything was due last week. lots of comments. There was a public comment period on that application, and this is where you feel really proud of our early childhood, and particular early childhood disability community, is lots and lots of comments about making sure that we talk about all children. Children that live in poverty, children of limited English proficiency, children with disabilities, children with special needs, children who are homeless, making sure that we mean all children, we don't just say all children. And the application, in the end, I think everyone agrees, was so heavy on making sure that we weren't just talking about access. Access is nothing. Getting in the door is nothing. That we were really talking about opportunity. These grants will be administered jointly by the U.S. Department of Ed and Health and Human Services. You know how hard it is to collaborate at the local level? Well, the state people will tell you how difficult it is to communicate at the state, collaborate at the state level. And we heard yesterday how exciting it is, how developmental disabilities and DDS and CDE and all the agencies together are collaborating. And that is so wonderful, because it is so hard at the state level because of these siloed programs we live in. Now, let me tell you, collaborating at the federal level, even though they keep telling you all to do it, really, really hard for them. But they're going to administer these grants together. Which is really good news for us, because that means they want all these pieces to work, all these silos. But look at this language. In order to write to this grant, which you did in California, as did quite a few other states, you had to require inclusion of children with disabilities to ensure access to and full participation in all opportunities. Forget getting in the door. We're talking about access to all opportunities. That's what we're about. Access is easy. That's civil rights. This is what we need. We need full participation in all opportunities. And then look at this. There's even a quantifiable data point that they're going to be looking at. You're going to have to ensure, and you signed this, you'd ensure that the percentage of children that you're going to serve in these new preschool 4-year-old slots will be proportional to the children that you count in preschool special education, or the national percentage, if that's higher. So there's really requirements in there to make sure this is not just going to be same old, but it will be. And so California is perfect, because this is the way you live, and this is what you think, and this is what you believe in. There's the other partnership, and I'm sure there's people, how many in the room applied for that Head Start Child Care Collaborative? A couple of you, good. So that's very exciting too, because that was money that came out of the budget. It was partnerships among early Head Start and child care. That's also money that's expansion money, incentive money, to encourage that working together so that we're not wasting money, but we're being more efficient. Trying to move a little quicker. So I want to mention a couple of things that are exciting about what's going on. See, I kind of wanted to skip over the money part. The money part's going to be a problem for us always. But we deal with it. We just keep advocating, right? Then I can't pretend. 2015, we don't know what they're going to do yet. They're going to come back and fix it after the election. 2016, we're looking forward to more really, really hard work, because those budget caps are very small. So it's not like we can expect a lot of new federal money. So collaboration and using the money we have well is really what we have to do. But there are exciting signs from the federal level. And so I want to talk about a couple of those. There's an organization at the federal level among all the federal agencies called the Early Childhood Interagency Policy Board. And it has representation from Health and Human Services, from all of the divisions and branches, maternal and child health, administration on children and families. You got people from Head Start, people from child care, and then from the Department of Ed, Department of Defense, people from the White House, from the Domestic Policy Council. And they meet quite often. Now, they're closed-door meetings, which I've come to decide I think is good. In the beginning, the advocates were all furious that we couldn't watch and hear and be there. But you know what happens when you put cameras on people? So it's better, I think, that they're working on their own, and they are working really hard, and it's all about early childhood collaboration. And they have just agreed to a certain priority that they want to work on for this year, and it's about early childhood inclusion. How perfect is that? They've taken it on as their initiative, and they're going to be issuing a number of things, including a joint policy statement that they're all going to sign. Now, you can only imagine how difficult that will be to get out, but we'll be able to all point to it. So I'll be able to look at that when I'm sitting at my local collaborative table and say, look, your person in mental health signed it, your person in child care signed it, everybody signed it. They expect us to do this. So this will, and they will echo all of the requirements from all of their programs, all the policies, how to make it work. They're going to do a lot of things, including exemplars and case studies, and they collectively, when you hear them talk about it, are really excited about this. So I think we have a lot to look forward to there. The rumor is, I have no idea, is that by next spring, at least that policy statement will be out. So we could kind of encourage and hope that happens. In addition, I'm hoping that many of you are Division for Early Childhood of the Council for Exceptional Children members, and if you are a DEC member, you know that DEC a year ago took on an inclusion effort, and we've now partnered with the federal office. And so we're really, really excited about that because they acknowledge publicly that DEC and they are partners, which is really important. DEC, I know a couple of you, I remember, were in St. Louis a couple of weeks ago at the DEC conference, and we had a listening session. We had a big room of people just like this, and we had open mics all over the room. And the federal folks from the policy board sat up at the front table, and members of the DEC board sat, and we passed the mic around and we said, what do you need from the federal government? What do you need from your organization? And what do you tell us what the challenges are, but also tell us the success stories. So DEC is committed to making that work, and you can see the things on, if you go on the DEC website, you'd see them. The recommended practices, the new ones from DEC that a number of people have mentioned in the last, yesterday and today, are fully based on an assumption of inclusive opportunities for all children. So I think there's really reason to celebrate and reason to be excited about that. So where we are right now with the funding is they've gone home, they're campaigning, there will be an election, and I know you probably will be just as glad as I will be that your phone will stop ringing, you will stop getting all those emails, you can actually answer your phone again because it will be over. We don't know what will happen yet, but it will be over. The money that they're arguing about right now is the money that if you're an IDEA grantee, you get next July. If you're child care or Head Start, frankly, it's money that was October 1, the year we're already in, because they're on this continuing resolution because they haven't made up their mind. They've been on continuing resolution in the fall of every year for over a decade now because they never can ever come to agreement till later. They've agreed at the moment to continue the funding levels from last year at a freeze level. And we know that's a little bit of sequestration back, but not a lot. But they really need to figure out a way to fund, and we don't know how they'll do it, but watch for it. They'll do it in December, or they'll punt it over to the new Congress in January. Probably depends on what will happen. But as I said, the caps for 16 are kind of grim, so be watching for that. But despite the money, the polls, every poll you look at, including the one from the first 5 years this summer, say the American people are totally behind universal early childhood. They want it. They believe in it. You can Google this poll and get the poll results on this one are fascinating. And you've got California polls, state polls all the time. But this one, 85% of voters said ensuring children with a strong start is a full national priority. And look at all the things that came above. Increasing jobs and economic growth. It ranked above improving quality of public schools, and that always ranks very high. But first is early childhood. I do see the sign, thank you. And 76% of the voters want the Congress and the president to act, okay? Do it, it's time, do it is what they're saying. Swing votes, swing voter groups, you know, we talk about voters in terms of swing groups, are also part of that. So they're trying to keep it in the spotlight. You know, the Congress is going home, so the federal legislation that's on there, that's there now, that the Senate's considered and the House is considered, is going to die. But it will be reintroduced the minute the new Congress comes in. But they just had events on the Capitol. Here's a good one. There's pictures you can see. Early Learning Builds Our Future was on the Capitol lawn a couple of weeks ago. And you can see there's great pictures. Secretary Duncan was there. Senator Hatch was there. You can recognize your fellow Congressman Miller was there, and basically saying it's time, it's time, it's time, it's time. So anything to keep kind of this in the spotlight. The legislation that's pending, so watch for it in the new Congress, and I'm sure you know about it. It's called Strong Start. Everybody know about Strong Start? Watch for it, and watch for it carefully because there'll be amendments and changes. People will want different things to happen. It was introduced last November. There's a Senate bill that's gone through committee. The House bill has not gone through committee. Remember how I said you can introduce it, but if it doesn't get through committee? So it didn't go through committee. There's a group, a coalition of early childhood people, mostly working on the areas of disability, that are pushing hard to get set-asides for some of the IDEA programs, so that as you build your full opportunities for children at your community programs, we'd have extra money for supports and services, so that children who do have IFSPs or IEPs can actually fully benefit and have the opportunity to participate. In the Senate, they marked up the bill. Senator Harkin said, I am not retiring until we do this. He got it through committee. There was an opposition bill from Senator Alexander, who co-chairs the committee. He's the ranking member of the committee, used to be Secretary of Education. And all I want to say is keep in mind the bill that got one less vote in the Senate Help Committee was this bill, Early Learning, Innovation, and Flexibility Act. Now, does that sound like a good thing? Okay, somebody said no. But flexibility, okay? Yeah, makes some of you very nervous, doesn't it? It's basically a block grant. And it said what we'll do is we will take all of the early childhood money federally, and there's a lot of it, they said. There is a lot of it. And we'll put it all together and we'll give it to the states, and they'll know best what to do with it. It got a lot of votes in the committee. It got a lot of positive support. In the end, bipartisan numbers, it went down, and Senator Harkin's strong start went up. Now, you decide which bill you like, but keep in mind it matters. House, not moving on it. Chairman Kline, who's a great advocate for disability and public education in this country, Chairman Kline said, the president and I agree more can be done, but look at those words. We have 45 programs, $13 billion. We need to examine strengths and weaknesses before we build new programs. You may be saying, sounds good to me, or you may be saying, what does that mean about the chance of the House Strong Start bill being passed? Is Mr. Kline going to sponsor that bill? No. I agree with it, he said, but I'm not going to do it because we've got other bills out there, okay? You're not going to go anywhere if the House and the Senate both don't agree to move. This is the last thing. I know I'm running out of my minutes here. Child Care Development Block Grant, 17 years we've been waiting for the Child Care Block Grant to be reauthorized. Senate passed a bill last spring. House, again, you see a theme here. House passes a lot of things, but the Senate rarely passes what the House passes. Senate passes a lot of things, and the House rarely passes what they want, which is why that slide was up there about the numbers. Senate passed by a bipartisan vote, the Child Care Development Block Grant. And it was a bipartisan, bicameral vote. They had House members, Senate members, they all got together and said, let's just do it. Let's get this one done before we go home. It passed the House, okay? This was the bipartisan compromise, get that word, compromise between the House and the Senate. They all got together, passed the House, and then what happened? Got to the Senate floor a couple of days before they went home for the election, and Senator Toomey from Pennsylvania, who had, in his mind, a very important piece of legislation, Protecting Students from Sexual and Violent Predators Act. He wanted that considered on the Senate floor. The Senate had decided to not consider that, and so he said, fine. You know how we talk to children? Once you've considered my bill, I will consider this bill. And you probably know the way the Senate works is they have what's called a filibuster. And you can be the lone senator who doesn't want a bill discussed or voted on, and all you have to do is go up and whisper in the Senate leader's ear and say, no, we're not voting on that. And it's done. It's not able to go through. The only way to get it through, which is what is scheduled for right after the election, is if they get a certain number of votes. It's called a cloture vote. And that cloture vote will say we can do it, regardless of Senator Toomey. And he will allow it. He's not going to continue it. So the good news is we think November 13th, you can probably put a date in your calendar, the Senate will pass the Child Care Development Block Grant, and they'll pass the same one the House did, and the president is waiting to sign it. If you want to look at that, there's lots of legislation. The Child Care Aware used to be NACRA. Go on their website. They've just announced, just yesterday, a lot of webinars to talk to you about the new changes. Lots of changes in Child Care Block Grant. So you want to look at those. Very important changes. NAEYC, another organization that many of us are members of, has published lots of summary statements on the changes. But I think we're feeling like we're almost there. Other things passed. The what was called the Combating Autism legislation passed. It's now got a new name. We all agree a much better name, Autism Cares Act. Home visiting was set to expire September 30th. Literally, hard sunset. No more home visiting. They passed an extension last March, but I'm here to tell you it expires again this March. So if the new Congress comes back and they don't extend home visiting, it's done. So advocates are already starting to work on that. So lots of things. TANF, Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, that's been up for sunset for every year, for years now, because they can't get that reauthorization through. The CR, the continuing resolution, extended it, but just till December. So when they come back, they've got to get TANF extended. I don't think I have time to do ESEA. The reason ESEA is important, of course, is because it covers all school-age programs and lots of early childhood programs. They've been working on ESEA since 2007. Same story. There are House bills, there are Senate bills. They just never get through because they have major, major, major disagreements on the pieces of legislation, not the least of which are provisions related to special education. In the meantime, the administration gave states the opportunity to have waivers, because as it got closer to the deadlines in the old No Child Left Behind, we needed those. And in the meantime, the Congress isn't moving. So they waived some things. Those of you who follow ESEA know exactly what this means. Should I stop? I mean, am I doing okay? 2 minutes? 1 minute? 1 minute. That really means 1 minute? Okay. I just want to know how much of the detail to go in on the slides. Restraint and seclusion, that's been it's actually sad to say been in the press for years now, and they've been trying to pass legislation. You've got advocates, certainly George Miller on the House side has been working so hard for this. It's not passing. They kept thinking they could tuck it into ESEA, Elementary Secondary Education Act, but there's still movement to try to pass it even through the lame duck session. But regardless, any of these important things, they will come back again in the new Congress. UN Treaty on disability rights, anybody been following that? A lot of you have. There's a disability treaty for the UN, has absolutely no impact on our laws, our money, or anything. It's a statement from the world. It's a treaty. It's waiting for Senate ratification. 156 countries have signed the treaty. 134 countries have ratified the treaty. Big push. They're not going to throw the box at me, are they?
They're going to put it on your head.
Big push to ratify that treaty. Okay, if you want to follow more, there's some links. I hope you're on all these listservs, but if not, there's a Office of Early Learning in the Department of Ed. Hey, how cool is that? We have an Office of Early Learning in the U.S. Department of Education. We never had that before. We have a Deputy Assistant Secretary for Early Learning. So these are things you can sign up for. My parting note, our friend Thomas reminded us, we in America do not have the government by the majority. We have a government by the majority of the people who participate. Thank you.
Okay.